So I'm going to keep this focused on a fairly practical approach to ESG rather than talking about what it is or why it's important, and try and keep a way of thinking about it and how you can build out and make sure that you're doing the best things you can and most relevant things for your organization. A whole load of hints and tips I can throw in at the end as part of Q&A. And as we said, very happy to just have this more as a conversation and chat as we go through. So if anything sparks any interest, just shout out and we'll make sure it's super relevant.
Thank you.
The slides on, and we'll, thank you very much. So I won't cover ESG in this much detail, other than the idea of ESG, if you can get it right, it should be lowering your costs, should help with your profitability, and either improve your share price, reduce risk, or your customer performance. If you're not doing that, then you're probably not doing it right. This should be a real force multiplier for every aspect of your organization, whether that is just mitigating risk or thinking about your core product and how you can take that forward and expand and use it to create new opportunities. And there's a lot of jargon in this space, so it's always worth just checking what we're talking about. Now there's much bigger focus on responsible business. So it used to be corporate social responsibility, then social responsibility into sustainability is commonly used, and ESG. Tend to use now responsible business because it just means everything. It has a really good catch-all that brings in the idea of your ESG, your environmental social governance, which often is frankly about the reporting, your risk, and how you understand where you are through those narrow frame sets. But then more around responsible business, responsible organization. How do you think about you as an entire organization, your purpose, your products, what your impacts are across the board? And that usually helps to really create more opportunities and to think in the most holistic sense. So for this one, I'll use sustainability, responsible business, or ESG fairly interchangeably, but there's a good sort of framework there just for wider awareness. And then lastly, just on, again, why does it matter? There's a useful slide here just in terms of think about your customers, your financials, being ahead of regulation, attracting and retention of talent, and then really thinking about how do you make the best of your contacts and contracts in terms of whether it's local government business, but also out into community as well. And really think about that in that, I said, that holistic sense, and think about how you build out long-term and meaningful partnerships. And just a quick flag at the bottom of some of the legislation that's sort of coming down the line and the ones that are sort of filtering through supply chain particularly. So TCFD, which is affecting the financial sector and is pretty much rolled out now. It will continue to go into ever small organizations and then all asset managers, pension providers and insurers. That's really beginning to filter down again through the supply chain because it starts with the biggest organizations. And the other one that's really coming online, CSRD in the European space, that was interesting because it's really moving the bar forward of what minimum standards look like. So double materiality study, for example, verified emissions data, things that at the moment actually considered pretty good practice are going to become standard in the next sort of 2 years. And that's affecting all businesses, 250 plus staff. So there's about 50,000 EU businesses affected that, all businesses operating in the EU. And there's an expectation, as we get closer to that launch, and particularly once it's launched, again, that will really begin to filter down through the supply chain into all organizations. And again, it's just part of that ongoing trend we're seeing of the bar moving forward really quickly. So just to stand still in this space, you've got to be proactive. And a lot of what I'll talk about now is just how do you set out and how do you think about it in a way that's both practical but also delivers good results. So a bit of a maturity path, and this one's quite good to think about where you are, but also where you want to get to. So a lot of organizations that they'll be doing sort of charity grants, a bit of carbon offsetting, paying the fine, often thinking about it in that way. It's good things to be doing, but it is that first step. And I think for any organization, often they'll have had this going on for quite a long time. Offsetting, maybe it's a first toe in the water, thinking about sustainability, but it should be recognized that is the starting point. When we think around how do you keep going around that maturity path, then think about your operations. So how do you do things? So what is about your energy use? How can you reduce that? How can you be proactive in your decision making? How are you mitigating risks? What are you doing in supply chain? And moving back into that how. The two significant areas to try and move into where you see the real gains. So one's more risk mitigation and cost saving. If you want to see real opportunities, product gain, client acquisition, etc. That's then really thinking about your product. So what is the purpose and impact of your product? Why do you exist? And what is the real offering that you can provide there? And how can you leverage that to create more market space, more brand lift and clients from a sustainability ESG perspective. And then the other half of that really is that sense of advocacy. How can you work with others? How can you find that? Could be organizations literally next door on the same estate in the same building as you. Could be local charities. It could be competitor organizations in the same sector. How do you move your whole sector forward? Or it could be ones completely unrelated, but in your supply chain. And how do you work in genuine partnership to share good ideas, to reduce costs? So if you're doing any sort of customer survey work together, share the results, get a bigger data pool, for example. And then thinking about how are you setting the example, how are you being a leader, creating some of these advocacy groups and stepping into where we are today as well. Really good opportunities where you can lift your presence, but gain good examples and good practice without actually having to pay for any kind of support. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but again, you just got to make the time and create the space. Anything around employee networks and helping to make it part of people's everyday work, particularly when you think about supply chain purchasing and customers. Again, it can be a natural affinity where you can see real benefits. Getting in the right direction. Here is a pretty standard model, but it's a good way in terms of thinking about how do you get into sustainability. First of all, always understanding where are you right now. Some good platforms you can use on that, and just get that honest appraisal of where you are. And then again, that second point, that really honest appraisal about where you want to go. And I've got the next slide sort of talks about that, but those two first ones, you don't have to make any of that public, but being honest with where you are really helps to set it out for the long term. And then thinking about what is your purpose, your product, your brand and your stakeholders. So again, understanding yourself and understanding where that ambition lands in those different areas, and then setting transparent targets. That's the first time when you really begin to go public, knowing clearly what you want to do, setting out those KPIs and those targets. So you've got something you can be measured against. And again, you don't need to be worried about that if you're going public and you don't hit those targets. It's, be realistic, say how you're going to get there, but you can be ambitious or you can be cautious. Either is fine, as long as you put a bit of narrative around it to say, we care about it, we're on a journey, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to get there. That how we're going to get there is the key point on all of these. Then start taking some action, get some policies in place, update your processes, look for any standards you can go to, whether it's Good Business Charter, and then all the way through to B Corp. Start thinking about what things can you leverage, and again, bring that back around to why you're doing it and how ambitious you want to be. Tell your network that advocacy bit, but also your employees, get them involved, get them interested, and then think about how you continuously improve. ESG and sustainability is all about how you continuously improve. And that brings us back to that the cycle. Where are you now? What are you trying to do? And what are your next steps? So we talked about that understanding where you are. There's a tool that we use called Every. It's a really good accessible platform. It brings together some of the more common standards, and just for a low cost, gives you a very quick snapshot and some quick wins as well. So it's effectively a bit of an ESG standard that you can just use, non-public, very safe again, and that really honest appraisal about where you are. And it just gives you those next steps. It does chuck out as well some really useful graphics and narrative that you can put straight up on your website or annual report and accounts or social media, so you can take those first steps. And again, because you've used the tool, you've got that robustness. And we usually follow that up with a materiality study. That is almost always the best place to go. Secondly, to think about if you want to actually be doing work beyond just being defensive and mitigating risk, materiality study is a really key way in terms of how you set out your best practice and where do you want to put your amount of work, where do you deliver your effort, where it's going to have the genuine impact. A materiality study, as I said, that's going to become standard expectation in the EU in a few years' time. So it doesn't hurt to be ahead of the curve, and it's a well-established, well-trodden path that is very, very credible. So when you start talking publicly, if you've got that as a foundation stone, it gives a lot of credibility to why you're doing what you're doing, but also critically why you're not doing certain things. So much in this space is having that confidence in why you're not doing some things. You can really progress with confidence.
Have you ever used a site called Ecology? I think I've just heard of it. They've just partnered with Zero, and it'll interrogate what your supply chain is and give it, not at the moment at a company level, but it's starting to do it at an industry level. So if you're buying from utilities, it'll analyze your purchase. I was just wondering how Every might compare, or whether you'd heard of that one. Or
I haven't heard of it. Nick, you're not.
I know a bit about Ecology, Howard. Yeah, so it's a platform. I think it started by providing a convenient channel for businesses to make commitments to climate action projects. But I know they've started building out their suite of tools as well. They're pretty active on social media, a lot of posts from LinkedIn. I've not seen their new tool myself yet. But I guess what it's doing is it's targeting some specific aspects of operations and helping to sort of manage that. So certainly under the E of ESG, the EVRI platform here, it looks across all elements, and it ties it into some of the global standard frameworks that are out there. So it kind of gives you a pretty comprehensive auditing kind of capability at a pretty low cost.
Is it sort of all sort of manually input, so you'll answer question by question and gradually build up that profile?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
It's designed to be industry specific. So the 4 standards they draw down upon, as you begin to fill out information about yourself, it will then close some avenues, open others, dial up, dial down. So you get a really good and appropriate reflection of where you are. And because it's using those commonly known ones, it's a useful. So if you are going up through a supply chain, you know, they'll recognize. So you're talking the same language to the expectations that are often coming down towards you, or questions that you might get asked. But you know, it's a really, you know, the question you raise is a great one, because it's a really fast moving space. So there are new providers coming in all the time. And again, certainly what I try to do on these kind of calls is just to cut through some of it and say, well, how do you take the approach so you can make good informed decisions on what tools do you use, etc. And also where, you know, again, I'll go back to that point, what not to do. You know, having that is as key as anything else.
Will it sort of benchmark me as an accountant? I'm either a good accountant or a bad accountant, or I'm a good accountant maths wise. I hear that, but on my standing.
Yeah, it will give you a direct score at the end, with clear ways that you can improve that score. And again, because it's mapping your industry and your scale against those standards, it brings out some steps that are appropriate for you. So it won't be trying to treat you as a huge provider if you're not, and it won't be trying to you know, treats you as an accountant, but actually giving you scores as if you're an insurance broker or something. It does have that nuance there, which is the key one, and kind of the actual work that's been done behind the scenes is that piece of work. How do you make all those standards relevant to you? That's the real gold dust in there, frankly, because it just makes it relevant. So when you get the advice that comes out the other side of it, it's things that's just genuinely useful for you. Now, again, this is about baselining, so it's helping you to understand exactly where you are and get those core things in place. How do you then build on from that for a long-term strategy? That's what materiality study will do. So materiality study won't tell you where you are, but it can really help you to understand where you need to be going and where to focus your efforts. And then sort of on that, moving from, once you've got those focuses, how do you build out ambition? This is a model that I've pulled together. I think it's a useful one to try and tease out. And again, I would always say, do this privately, do it with some key stakeholders that you really trust, and be really honest, to think about, we want to have business success and focus on your product for best practice, but be really clear about how much is this about your core purpose. Some organizations, it won't be related to core purpose. It's about risk. It's about simply making sure that we're ticking the box here. Other organizations, it's absolutely fundamental to who they are, and the B Corp's a good example of that direction. Then be thinking about, what is the impact that you actually want to have? And again, some organizations will really want to see a genuine, long-lasting, deep impact, whereas others, frankly, the actual impact isn't as critical. It might be very narrow, it might be really focused, whatever. And then the third one on message. How much is this about your brand? How much is it about client acquisition? And being really transparent and really clear on that. For some organizations, it's all about the message, and frankly, the purpose and impact is secondary. For others, it's all about the purpose and the impact, and message is irrelevant to them. It's all about their internal message to their staff, and it's not going to be something they take public. And again, being really conscious about that is critical, because if you aren't sure about these things, you can start running in one direction and wasting a lot of time and effort. Equally, you can start investing for one outcome, and you're not actually setting yourself up for where you want to be. And doing this with your key stakeholders, with the board, with your key decision makers, so that you're all on the same page. And again, a lot of times with ESG, because there is the ethics side to it, there's a lot of emotive energy around this. Making sure everyone is on the same page and flushing out any assumptions or any concerns that people have is really valuable and can progress you very, very quickly. It just really, really helps. And then last thing, I'm just bringing an example. So this is a cancer charity, and we're thinking about, we've done a materiality. So what does that mean? Where do we want to act? And the materiality study will look at the key sustainability issues out of the myriad of things they could do. So, we ended up with a list of 100 things. We boiled it down to 16 essential ones. And this is the kind of areas that we've looked at. So for Cancer Research UK, it's all about cancer inequalities. That's about our purpose, beating cancer for everybody. And now that's about inclusive research methodologies, and also inclusive outcomes and cures. Into our secondary phase, and we've got things like our research approach. So how sustainable is our research approach? Climate change, money in, money out, etc. Inclusion, diversity, talent, patient support, making sure they're fully involved in how we develop, talent acquisition and retention. So we know that a lot of these are things we're doing anyway, but we now know these are critical focus areas with our sustainability narrative and also our sustainability lens and investment. And then we've got the other areas. Now, these are all critical areas, but when we think about it from a sustainability perspective, some of them where we need to be good enough. Now, we need to be excellent at cybersecurity and data protection for obvious reasons, but for sustainability perspective, we need to be just good enough. And again, knowing that is really important. So when you look at this through a finance lens or a data protection lens, these will move up and move down as appropriate, and that's the overall strategy approach to balance all that. But knowing very clearly what you're trying to do from a sustainability perspective helps you to know: is it all about the S? Is it all about the G? Is it all about the E? How do you dial those up? How do you dial those down so that when you're spending money and time and effort, which you can be spending in all different places? Let's be clear: all of these things are good. You want to make sure you're doing the best one for you, and that's what materiality study results will do. And the output of that is thinking around, okay, and think about that ambition. We thought about, well, what does the corporate space look like from hygiene through to pioneering? And then what does our sector look like from hygiene through to pioneering? How do they compare? And then where do we actually see ourselves? So, Cancer Research UK, we would think ourselves, we're here to beat cancer. That is a very core social impact mission. The sustainability aspect of that needs to enhance that core mission and be relatively defensive from the other side. We need to, we're a leading charity. We've got to be leading in this space within the sector. But when we think about beyond the sector, actually, we just need to be good. Where we need to be pioneering is on cancer research, on cancer inequalities. And that goes back to that materiality study. So knowing that that's what we think and our external stakeholders also think, that gives us the confidence to step into the space and also explain why we're not trying to be pioneering at everything. So we know very clearly how does this link back to our core mission, what are we trying to achieve? And then there's a little bit at the bottom there just about values-led and impact areas. So again, reflecting back on what are we trying to achieve? And that's that logic loop about this is who we are, this is what we're trying to do. Here's a sustainability lens, matching those up. And then for us, we come out with cancer inequalities. I'm going to stop talking now. I've got a sort of current trend slides and hints and tips, but I will just talk about this one briefly, and then I'll just open it up to questions. So, I mean, a couple of things I think it's good to know that there is a lot more public reporting going on, and it's a really fast baseline. We know in this sector, you've had to be walking very fast and then sort of running just to stand still in the space. And that is certainly happening. We're seeing, the charity sector is now proactive in this space, and they are the most socially active and purpose-led organizations. It is now reaching absolutely everybody. I think it will start to affect SMEs, particularly through the supply chain. And again, thinking through your key suppliers and their expectations and having those proactive conversations is a really good place to start. If you're not having those conversations, others will be. So, head that off. War for talent at the moment means that purpose and ESG is a key part of that talent and retention. We know it particularly for younger people, but for people of all generations, it does matter. Even if it's not a key sell for your recruitment, don't let it be a negative. Don't let somebody else outpitch you on this point. It might be one of those factors that makes a difference. And we've all seen the energy costs, thankfully, beginning to come down, but still at a very high level. And again, how many of us would have loved to have invested in putting solar panels on our roofs 3 years ago? Well, sustainability, we're seeing some of that manifestation, that use. It's still a good point of saving money and efficiency. And usually sustainability, looking through that lens, is a good place to start. And then lastly, there's quite a move away from targets to a focus on actual delivery. So when we think about that reporting, that first point I raised here, now people are much more interested in what are you actually doing. Don't tell us about targets. Don't tell us about your dreams. Tell us about what you're doing, and then report regularly and transparent on that. And again, there's a little bit of a move away from offsetting at the moment and sort of paying the fine to say, well, just reduce your own activities. You know, you can do both, absolutely, but if it's a question between offsetting or actual delivery, spend on the delivery, because you're effectively reinvesting in your business anyway. So you're reinforcing those cost savings, efficiencies, etc., and you'll get much more of a brand lift in those areas rather than spending on offsetting. So, you know, there's 5 key trends that I'm seeing. The last one, a 6th one, bonus one I'll add in, is there's definitely a move to think about biodiversity and nature, and that balancing, thinking about carbon. So I'll stop talking there and throw up to questions. Nick, I know you had a few prepared, but
great. Well,
yes, on anything.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's been really helpful kind of overview of ways in which you can start making a progress along your journey as a small business, and also thinking about sort of some of the trends and perspectives, both from third sector as well as sort of more generally across the industry. I think the key thing for me that's a takeaway in that is that it's that focus on delivery going forwards, and just making a start in some format is the most important thing to do, because from there, once you started, you can measure the impact you're having, you can focus on continuous improvement, and you can communicate that story as well.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Is very important.
I mean, a lot of organizations we talk so a lot of organizations that we talk to are often very nervous about greenwashing and being out there. I think now that you know, there's a well-trodden known path to start where you can be credible. Just start with something. Don't worry about it. As long as you're transparent and honest with what you're doing, you won't fall foul of any kind of greenwashing. Greenwashing will only happen if you start setting out big targets and ambitious things, and it's very obvious. So I think getting over that fear and just getting started would be a key sort of piece of advice, and then build out from that. But there are so many people, so many organizations we talk to they either don't know where to start or they're just too afraid. And
fear of inaction.
Getting past that is key.
Great. Well, let's open for questions and thoughts from others on the call. And I do have a few other things I might fire at you otherwise, but
sure.
Over to you guys. Anything you want to ask of Alex, or any comments you want to make on things that you've seen or heard?
Yeah, I've got a couple of sort of points which I sort of would be interested in. One is I think it was about the slide before. It was very much, you know, which box does it tick, E, S, or G, and it's quite industry specific. I did read a really good read is The Greengrocer, which is the chap who runs Iceland, and he's bound in that space, so he's limited to what he can do. But it was really so he does what he can, and it's like you say, it's not about being ultra green, because you can't running a competitive supermarket, but he does what he can. And I guess, is there a sort of like sounded to me like a bit like a risk assessment, likelihood times this times that, where you've got a number of stakeholders. If I was looking at mine as a small business, is that how you do? You turn those dials up and down, and could give me an overall score? Because I'm less specific, you know. I just wondered if there was a sort of way I could approach those dials.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one is the slide we put back up here on the purpose impact message to dial those up and down as appropriate to you, and that can really help to guide where you want, how much you want to invest and how much effort you want to put in and for what outcome. And then when you think about your ESG, the materiality study is what does that. And you know, what that actually is trying to do is to ask your key internal decision makers and then your key external stakeholders, so it's customers, investors, suppliers, local community, any other persons of influence. What are their views? What do they think? What are they seeing? What do they think is going to be impacting you, the business, and what do they think your business will be impacting on? And that will usually help you very quickly to see, is your organization really about the E, and are the expectations on you about environment, or are they about social impact, or are they about governance? And it may be that it's all about governance, and that's fine. And always start with where you're going to have the best impact and what's most relevant to the people that you're providing a service to, or that you're dealing with. You can always build out the other ones as you get more confident, as you grow, as you know, you see the wider benefits. But certainly in the first 2 years, even first 3 years, focus in on those absolutely core impact areas, because it will just magnify the rest of your business. I will say there is a baseline on environment. It's good to be doing something there, usually just from saving money. You know, what the E will do quite often is give you permission to stop doing things. So using paper, printing physical annual reports, whatever it might be, just turning off lights or nudging people to do that. Leveraging the E can be an ineffective way to help to foster change, from rather than it simply being here's another change. You can add the both a moral dimension, but also a business efficiency objective. But also from you may well have people in the organization who are just really passionate about environment. Set them loose, get a working group together, get them a senior sponsor or yourself as CEO, and meet with them and just let them do grassroots initiatives, because almost always those things will save you money, if not immediately, but certainly in the long term. But often they'll just ask you to stop doing things. And now you've got a grassroots proactive desire for change that will just do it for you, as opposed to having to do it a top down and so much harder. Setting that loose is good. And again, it means that you're spreading the workload. It becomes much more organic and the people just want to do it. I'll guarantee every organization there'll be at least one person who's really passionate about this. If you can give them a little bit of space just to come up with ideas, they will come up with good ideas. It happens everywhere.
What sort of forums do you think that space would take? We've got 7 of us here, so we're a really small organization, and often you kind of might ask that in a group meeting. It's either not enough time for them to think, or maybe they're not that passionate. And how do you sort of like,
sure.
I'm guessing Microsoft Forms, or ask them maybe what are the best ways of getting that out of the people?
There's two ways I think on this. One is that where you want to get to is that it's part of all decision making, that the sustainability or the ESG question, whatever your key priorities are, is part of every decision that you make. It's just part of the process of making decisions and spending money. So which supplier do we go for, where an offer's going to be based, whatever, from micro decisions up to large decisions. That's kind of where you want to get to. In terms of sustainability with a working group, the key one is to create a dedicated space to think about this. If you tag it onto the end of meetings, it will always get left off because it's the new thing. So always have a dedicated space. Maybe it's an hour. It could even be an hour a month. It doesn't matter. Just a dedicated space. Always remember that people will learn and interact in different ways. If you have a big sort of sticky notes on the walls, some people are more reflective and you just won't get their ideas in that situation. So it gives people a question in advance. So just maybe something, if you could do 2 things to make this organization more environmentally effective, or to help nature, or to reduce our carbon footprint, what would we do? Just those 2 things. Keep it really simple. If you've got any coaching experience, leaning to that. So easy question to just get the ball started. They can reflect on it in advance, bring the ideas together, have an hour session just to chat about what we think we do, have a reflection afterwards to agree it offline. And then just however you do things in your business, do it in the same way. So if you have quality circles, or you've got a Scrum approach, or you just X person over there is just brilliant at getting stuff done, however you work, just lean into that and make this part of your natural work. Don't add another level of change to or expectation onto this. Lean into just how you work. Your organization, your culture, how you get things done. Really leverage that as best you can.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Claire's just put a note in the chat. I thought she's had to leave us early, but she found the session really insightful. Yeah, any other questions? John, I see you joined just partway through. Any thoughts from what you'd heard at all?
Yeah, good afternoon all. Really interesting. We are faced with things at James's Place now that we've looking just from the environmental and climate change perspective. We've got some really ambitious public commitments, climate positive in operations by 2025. We do quite a lot of offsetting at the moment. How do we turn that around? To be part of your dialogue. Certainly, our own perception, stakeholder, shareholder demands will be that we try to start minimising our offsetting that we do at the moment. We've been committed to be net zero in our supply chain by 2035 and net zero in our investment portfolio by 2050. Our investment portfolio contributes some 94% of all the carbon emissions for St James's Place, and currently it's £146 billion. That's the value of our investments. So we've got to the position at the moment where we've got some really high level public commitments, and my plan with my very small team that I'm sort of assembling, but building across all our stakeholders internally within the company, is to put together a really meaningful transition plan. to bring in, looking at our we've got 23 offices around the country, how to look at when those leases are up for grabs, so, up for a sort of renegotiation or what's a natural break point, how we look at releasing our buildings for more favourable sort of energy management infrastructure, how within our own Cirencester estate that we don't own, but how we're going to look at potentially solar panels, heat pumps of one form or the other, crafting that into our planning. But those are sort of quite relatively easy to do because there's no big cultural change. What there is a cultural change is commuting habits for our people. And I went to the Cotswold Local Environmental Action Group recently, and there was a really good slide presented there, which just showed the kind of the for a typical organisation, you can micromanage your energy account, but the sort of the patterns of people's behaviours, what they buy, what the organisation buys, particularly the commuting habits of people, are the biggest aspects of some of our sort of transition journey that we're going to be faced with. And how do we do that? Well, at the moment, we offer an allowance for people joining our company that if they can, for example, benefit off the top of my head, £17,000 grant to go towards a purchase of an electric vehicle, or they can claim a motor fuel allowance each year, £5,000-6,000. So it may be that we start to think about actually we bring in the sort of the electric vehicle, because there will be over the next couple of years a natural sort of changeover of people to electrical vehicles. We want to try and expand and accelerate that. And, what is the business benefit of doing it? What is the kind of the cost to the business of trying to allow us to go? And so there's a whole range of kind of activities that we're thinking of from the business perspective, just on the environment and climate change, and trying to get our very proactive senior management and the board, but they want to see they want to see the profit and loss account associated with this.
There's a few dynamics here. So I guess some baselines in this. One is cultural change takes time. So you need to really understand that if you may be looking into a 3, 5, even 10-year rotation on that, and there's a lot of factors in that. So recognize that and accept it, and understand the culture that you're operating in. The key thing I would say whenever you're doing cultural changes, pick your battles. So if you make sure you've got a really good idea about where your scope 1 and 2 emissions are, and then the percent of that in scope 3. The big things are almost always going to be in scope 3, which is the upstream, downstream of your product and your supply chain. And for St James's Place, obviously investments is the big ticket item. That is your core product, and there's a natural migration that will just have to happen as the world moves in this way. If you think about your core activities, first of all, make sure you've got really robust data in terms of where you are. And if you're an SME, get an idea. Now, if you're a big organization, make sure it's robust. If you're a small organization, make sure you've got at least an idea about where your scope 1 and 2. So what direct emissions are, your electricity, your travel, your work from home, those kind of aspects, so that you're picking a battle that is worth picking. Because if your travel is a tiny percentage, don't have that battle. Go and do it in somewhere that has a bigger battle. Now, the caveat to this, and I think there's always something you have to reflect on environment, is you're always balancing a few factors. So one is, what risk are you mitigating? So what brand risk are you mitigating? There's what genuine impact you're actually having. Some things will be a lot of effort for very little impact. Some will be low effort for high impact. And also, what lift do you get for your key stakeholders? And this is the key one. And often things like transport, things like recycling bins, it has a very, very low impact, but it's the things that people touch, see. You can't have the message over here if everybody in the car park's turning up in a 4x4 and commuting in every single day. So from that, when you're looking at those kind of aspects, when you're going to really affect people's behaviors and people's culture, make sure you're picking the key ones. Now, if we assume that that's the case with the travel, get data. I mean, that's always, you need to make this. I personally, I never make the case from a moral argument. I will always do it from a business case argument. I think that's more effective. I think you'll carry you further. So, and the moral is kind of like, it's a happy byproduct, right? We all survive longer. It's a happy byproduct. For the travelers, look at business case, see what your competitors are doing around talent recruitment and retention. We're obviously If at SJP, you'll be competing globally for talent, certainly in the UK. Other businesses, how are you standing out? How can you use flexible working? How can you use support in this space to be a point of difference? There's also, again, look at it from a savings point of view. All the offices that have been closed, the amount of time that actually gets saved on people's life from not going to the office. Changing that is now recognize that that's a much bigger change than the sustainability team or a sustainability champion can deliver. That is about your HR practice. That's about your leadership culture. And you have to bring in that collaborative perspective. Working groups are usually a good way to deal with that, where you bring together those key stakeholders, say this might take 2 years, but we're going to set out how we're going to do this. Who do we need to have in the room? What are the levers we're going to pull? Who are the key people that we're going to need to get on side because they're not? Are there key barriers that are just going to have to be overcome one at a time? And again, what are the arguments that we need to make that will actually land, make a difference? And anything in culture, make sure however much you're doing in that culture space, you've got other things that are happening that are easy to do, so you get the momentum. Momentum in the space in a large organization is absolutely essential. When you're working in a smaller organization, having those wins so that people can feel the difference, you can see it tangibly, is also absolutely, getting those two things going in parallel. It's very easy to get either disheartened on the big stuff that takes ages to change, or you just get excited by the easy things, but you don't actually ever tackle some of those more fundamental questions, usually around product. The last thing I'd just say is lean into the supply chain. Your supply chain can be your biggest asset. You can work with organizations who are good in this space and learn from them. You can use their case studies on your website. You can get them to show you how to do it. Control of your supply chain from a sustainability perspective is really important. If you've got 7 people in your business, they can all go and buy things. You just won't have any control or knowledge about what's going on. And then someone will buy, balloons from somewhere, and the last thing you want is balloons in the office. There's the basics that everyone needs to kind of stop doing. But that's, as soon as everyone can purchase, then you've got to educate everyone. If you've got a tight supply chain, that is really helpful for sustainability. Is frankly just good business practice anyway. You don't want it to become overly controlled so that people can't make fast decisions, etc. But you do need from a sustainability perspective, you want to have a decent control so that people know what they can purchase, they know where they can purchase, what are they looking at, what their risks are. And usually behind the scenes, this is really good for your supply chain risk in terms of modern slavery, human rights, child exploitation, etc. And you can leverage that. Easy question, just ask people, is there a social enterprise that can provide this service for us? One of the key difficulties on sustainability often is the cost is in one area and a benefit is the other. So you go with a social enterprise, the benefit comes into the marketing team and the social media team, but the cost is with the purchaser. As a business, helping the organization to think holistically about the cost and the gain rather than my budget, your gain, that can help to bring down barriers. Again, working groups is a good way of doing that. Involving marketing, when you're balancing purpose, impact, and message, getting those stakeholders in the room so that when you're making decisions, you hear all the voices, not just the one who's got the pain, but the ones who's actually got the gain. And that can be really effective to move conversations forward and allow change to happen.
Thank you. That's a really great advice. Thank you.
Just on a question on the supply chain there, this does feel like auto enrollment. It starts with the big companies at 500 plus, and then it's going to roll down to 250, and it will come to our SME market inevitably. Are there plans for a company to accredit itself, a bit like a Checker Trade, where we will have the green tick and we can self-certify or show that we've got a responsible conduct? Because I think the onus is falling on the customer or the purchaser or the bigger businesses. Whereas I think if they could make easy choices, which would make that pain less. I wondered if there's anything like that coming down the line that
not that I'm aware of, but I think there are getting the ticks, getting the benchmarks you can lean into to just tell that story. So I think things like Good Business Charter are useful. They give you that little badge that you can lean into. It ticks 10 essential areas. Again, it's a good way to know how you're performing there. A lot of industries will have industry specific ones, whether you're in travel or finance or whatever. And I think looking at those and seeing what your competitors have got or seeing what other organizations have got, that's a useful one to lean into. And that's why I talked about the advocacy and being within a network where you can see what other sectors are doing, what was easy, what was hard. The last area, the closer you are to the big purchasers, the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, etc., the closer you are to knowing what those expectations are, because they will have that simply in their terms of trade and their supplier expectation documents. As a charity, I can say that we've now started to receive clauses that we will only give you money if you have responsible sourcing built into your supply chain and if you've got a net zero target. Now that's organizations beginning to put that onto charity donations. So you can imagine that is the base expectation. So again, I think if you're an SME, this has definitely reached mid-cap territory. It is going to filter down. You've also got customer expectations coming up from the other way as well. And if you want to know what you should be doing, I would just go out and have an honest conversation with some of your key customers, your key suppliers, and just ask them what pressure are coming on them. You know, that's how you can get ahead of this a little bit, to look at your supply chain and just have those conversations. Again, you may well find that they're having exactly the same questions and uncertainties as you are, and then you say, well, why don't we build a strategy together? And then you're sharing your problems, you're sharing the learning, and it can really don't. If you use ESG, can turn into product differentiation and competitive advantage, but you don't have to get there by yourself. And again, one of the questions is, does it help if the whole sector improves? Charity sector, for example, it's not helpful if one charity, if Cancer Research UK suddenly become brilliant, we just begin to make the rest of the sector look bad. It's actually far better if the whole sector moves forward together. That may not work where you are, it may do, but thinking proactively in that space and thinking about, well, what organizations can I work with? That will help, and you will be able to, you can all begin to divide and conquer with some of the work. One of you look at the E, one look at the S, one look at the G, all go and review 2 different standards together and come back and decide which ones you want to go with. You can be creative in that space, and you'll save a lot of effort.
I think to some degree we're lucky our product is defined by law. Income minus costs equals profit, and you pay tax on profit. So our product it's like you say, it's who do you want to sort of associate with, and what's the differences in how they deliver that. So
yeah, and talk to your customers and see what expectations do your stakeholders have on us. The journey CR UK is in, we don't know yet what we reach 36 million people a year. We deliver 570 events a year. We don't know what those people think we should be doing from a sustainability perspective. Do they only care about cancer? Do they only care about environment? Our materiality has shown that in 10 years' time, both external and internal stakeholders think climate change will be our top sustainability issue, even ahead of cancer inequalities. We don't know at what point in the next 10 years that shift is going to happen, but we need to be alive to that. We need to make sure that we've got that robust message that when climate change becomes an ever important and critical issue, we're able to say why cancer remains as important. And again, with whatever product, whatever sector you're in, at what point does climate change become a really significant factor in decision making, in your risk profiling, in some of your costs? If you ask yourself, where do you think I'm going to be in 10 years' time? Often that can help you to lift out of the immediate tactical questions and emergency issues that are bombarding you with, and allows that strategic thinking. And you'll probably find that what you were thinking is relevant in 10 years' time, probably is actually relevant in 2 years' time, but it just frees you up to have that kind of open discussion. And again, do that with some peers, do that with other key decision makers in your organization. Often you'll find that you'll get a much more productive conversation by framing it in that 10 years hence. It just liberates you from a lot of the day-to-day tactical decisions and challenges that we're all just obviously facing every single day in our jobs.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. And thank you for the questions as well. It's been a good discussion. I think to summarize, I would say the key thing is making sure that you're starting all your thinking with business rationale and business cases first and foremost. The importance of an audit as a baselining process for understanding where you are. The importance of moving to something along the lines of a materiality study that really helps to set both direction and priorities. And then the consideration of benchmarks in an appropriate context as a way of telling your story. But it's not about the badge, it's about the work that you do both in the lead up to make the change and ongoing that makes the difference there. So thanks very much for your interaction. It's at this point where I get the pleasure of promoting our speaker of next month, which happens to be on this call right now. At least I hope this is not a surprise for you, Howard, but you're down to present your story. So Howard Smith of the Number Crunchers tells his ESG journey. You'll find us here next month. I think it's the 30th of May for another Lunch and Learn. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Super.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
See you later, everyone. Bye.